Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Lisa Kenner Grissom, and I produce special events and special projects for Yiddishkeit. And I'm coming to you live today from Los Angeles, where spring has definitely sprung. I can smell the wildflowers. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to our culinary and culture salon, the Rye Edition. We have an incredibly talented group of artists joining us today from various corners of the world. And we just heard some beautiful music from Belarusian musician Serhii Duhushau, who is beaming to us from Minsk, Belarus. And we'll meet him and hear more music from him later on in the program. A little bit about our organization, for those of you who don't know us. Yiddishkeit is an intercultural nonprofit arts organization. We were founded 25 years ago with the mission to preserve, cultivate, and broadcast the treasures of Yiddish culture, the diversity of its legacy, and the progressive tradition of Jewish, European, and immigrant life, and to explore Yiddish culture's resonance today. And to set the stage a bit in terms of the Jewish calendar, we are in the 7-week period between Passover and Shavuos. So we're thinking about what it means to move from Exodus to Enlightenment, from limitation to liberation, and in culinary terms, this translates to going from eating a lot of matzah, or the bread of affliction, to indulging in gluten-filled and dairy treats, which is the custom of Shavuos. So the offerings from our artists today are loosely connected by these notions of sustenance, enlightenment, and liberation. And with that, I'd love to bring on our first guest, Karina Borowitz. Hi, Karina.
Hi there, Lisa.
I'm going to sing your praises for a minute. So let me do that, because there's a lot to say about Karina. Karina is an award-winning poet who's coming to us today from the Pioneer Valley in Western Massachusetts, which happens to be my home state. She studied writing at Bard College and went on to earn a BA in History and Russian at the University of Massachusetts and an MFA in Creative Writing and Poetry from the University of New Hampshire. She also spent 5 years living and teaching in Russia and Lithuania. And in addition to her own poetry, she's also translated from the Russian and the French. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to see you. I think before we have our chat, we'd love for you to read your poem, Old Country. So I'm going to go away for a moment and have you read, and then I'll pop back on.
Okay. The old country. There was another country always spoken of with reverence. I didn't understand why we left. I didn't yet understand the saw blade of history. I was nourished by nostalgia for a place I couldn't remember. Wasn't there a great forest, a bison that would lap milk from my hand? The scrape of that secret dark tongue. A woodsman's cottage, shelves lined with carved and painted birds. Our fireplace was where the stories were read from a burning book, molten logs lit from within. See the shadow of a man in there. See a terrifying creature with wings. See it all fall down.
Thank you so much. So beautiful. I'd love to just start there with the poem. If you could tell us a little bit about your inspiration for writing it and when it was written.
So when I was writing this poem, I was contemplating communities and the fact that we're all individuals, but in the context of communities, sometimes different communities. And for me, this really hit home, because I grew up in an immigrant community surrounded by immigrants and first and second generation Americans. I went to school with first generation Americans, and I just got this notion that folks had one foot planted in this country and often one foot planted in another country, the old country. And there was this sense of nostalgia passed on from parents and grandparents. And that sort of connected all of us, but at the same time, we were making our way in a new culture. So this sort of straddling two cultures is something that I knew growing up, and that is very interesting to me.
And so I'm just curious when the poem was written, and when was the last time, you read this poem aloud? Does it feel different today reading it aloud, and does it have resonance in a new way?
Absolutely. So this poem was written several years ago, maybe up to 5 or 6 years ago. It is just published in my new book that's out in January 2021. So in that way, it's sort of gaining a new life. But it does, when I read it these days, it does take on a little bit of a different feel for me. In the past 2 or 3 years, I had been working with refugee populations, and I did get the sense that there was still this nostalgia for places that they had been from, even though what they were leaving was often terrible oppression, terrible poverty. Um, so that all comes flooding the poem for me as well. My contemporary experience with people from different populations who know this sense of living in two worlds.
So interesting, and especially with everything that's going on today, it can have so much resonance for all different types of immigrant populations. I wanted to just turn to when we had our chat a few weeks ago. You shared some just wonderful nuggets about the writing life that we thought, when we were talking, just had sort of thematic resonance for the salon, just in terms of things gestating and the discipline of it. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your writing practice.
Sure. So I do talk a lot about craft of poetry and writing when I do talks and when I go into classrooms and on my blog. And one of the metaphors there are lots of different metaphors that are used for writing. The planting, the nurturing, the reaping. But for me, one of the most apt metaphors is baking bread. For me, the process is absolutely the same. It's the yeast is the ideas that I sort of turn over, and as we spoke about before, my process usually takes place over a week. This is when I'm sort of getting a poem ready, and the yeast of an idea will sort of percolate and ferment, and then throughout the week I sort of knead it and add ingredients to it, a little bit of salt here, a little bit of honey there, a little bit more flour to make it drier. And then you shape it into a loaf and you let it rise again. And then you take a look at it when that process is toward the end. And then when you feel it's ready to a little bit closer to being ready, you put it in the oven and you bake it. And then you bring it out, you tap the bottom. And if it has that sound, that hollow sound that bread has, but with poetry, sometimes it's done by the sound. You know when it sounds just like bread. That's how you know when it's done. So you listen for that sound of completeness. And for me, it fits so well.
That's so wonderful. Yeah, that's so wonderful. So I just, as a question, just as a writer to a writer, do you read out loud? Do you read it out loud to yourself all week long as you're working on it? Or do you, yeah.
Absolutely. And this is something that I feel very strongly about. Poetry is meant to be spoken. Poetry is an art form of sound and music, and I give it voice the whole way through.
That's great.
So I don't like to think of poetry, and I hate it when people think of poetry as dead text on a page, because it is not. And I really love that poetry is seeing a revival, but particularly because poets these days are paying more attention to the community, the communal aspect of poetry, and it's meant to be shared, it's meant to be spoken, and it's meant to bring us together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then also during the week too, you spend this week writing this one, crafting this poem, which I think is such a discipline, and it does sort of resonate with that, and Stan and I will talk about this too, but like the work of like baking bread, or the work of like, doing the labor, putting the labor in to create this this finished product, or, you know, a product that may need additional crafting, but you've got this thing by the end of the week that you've honed all week long. So I find that tremendously inspirational. So.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just love talking about the craft of writing and the process, because for me, when I'm together with other writers, when I go to a poetry reading, I love to hear writers talk about how they do it. Different things work for different people, and I like trying different things, but this is something that I come back to again and again, and the nurturing of a poem over the course of a week.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, well, we will say so long for a moment. We're going to meet you again toward the end of the, we'll meet you again a little later in the program. So we'll see you in a little bit. And I'm going to now introduce Stan Ginsberg, who is also known as the Rye Baker. Stan is joining us from sunny San Diego. I'm gonna sing your praises, Stan, for a little bit. Stan is the author of The Rye Baker, which I have right here. Yes, I have right here, because it's gorgeous. I need to show it to you. It came out in 2015, and his first book, which is called Inside the Jewish Bakery, was co-authored with Norman Berg, and it received the International Association of Culinary Professionals 2012 Jane Grigson Award for Distinguished Scholarship in the Quality of its Research and Presentation. And Stan is a native New Yorker from Brooklyn, and he and his wife Sylvia live in San Diego. And I just want to say that one of my inspirations, and Stan knows this, one of my inspirations for the salon came from my experience as a Helix Fellow in 2019, which is Yiddishkeit's immersive experiential travel study program that takes place in Eastern Europe. And Stan also has a tour program that we'll talk about. And truthfully, I ate so much delicious rye all along the way, from the Baltics to Belarus. I became sort of obsessed with the cultural significance of rye. So with that, we tracked Stan down and asked him to join us today. So welcome, Stan.
Thank you.
So I'd love to just start. There's so much to talk about. I want to get into the history of rye, but let's start a little bit with your own history, and maybe you can kind of lead us from your personal history to the history of rye.
Sure, absolutely. To start off with, I really resonated with what Karina was saying about immigrant communities, because I was fortunate enough to grow up in a neighborhood in Brooklyn that was a foot in both worlds. My grandparents were immigrants from Eastern Europe. My mother's parents lived in the same apartment building as we did. And the first language I heard was Yiddish rather than English. It was living kind of an urban shtetl sort of lifestyle. My grandfather used to drag me along to this little storefront shul, called Stiebel in Yiddish, the little room. It had a mechitza down the middle. The women sat on the left, the men sat on the right, directly in front of the bima. And behind the bima was another room with a long table where the old men would sit and argue over Talmud every afternoon. So it was really very traditional. I grew up going to Jewish bakeries and kosher butchers and everything else. And as I said, I grew up bilingually with English and Yiddish. Amazing. And rye bread, talking specifically about rye bread was what we ate from Monday through Friday afternoon. And then Friday night was the challah, and the challah lasted however long it lasted. And then we'd go to the bakery on Sunday morning, my father and I, and buy cookies and Danish and rye bread and rolls and whatnot. And we ate rye bread for the rest of the week.
And you had said, here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, what do you have for us today, Stan?
I'm sorry?
That's a Jewish rye, correct?
This is a traditional Jewish deli rye. Actually, it is. It's been somewhat Americanized, but it's really very much like a traditional Ukrainian rye, and it was something that took over the bakeries.
So
Interestingly,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, interestingly, the rye breads that I grew up with in the late 40s, 50s, were really not the rye breads that my grandparents ate. Most of those disappeared from Jewish bakeries in America in the after World War II.
Right.
And this was because the bakers found it much easier to work with wheat. Wheat was much more available than rye, whereas in Europe, wheat was a premium product. And in fact, even in areas like Ukraine, where wheat is grown, the nobles and the landowners who controlled the economy then would sell their wheat to Western Europe. So all of the peasants, the people who actually grew the wheat, ended up eating rye also.
So yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that, about rye, being known as sort of the peasant bread.
Right.
Maybe you can say a little bit more about that and just sort of how these class distinctions, and also, how rye really sustained these populations in times of strife and hardship. I'd love to hear more about that.
I think to start off with, just the role of bread in pre-modern European culture or society. Fernand Braudel, who was a French historian, wrote magnificent stuff about daily life in pre-modern Europe. Estimated that people ate on average, every adult ate on average around 2 kilograms, 1.5 to 2 kilograms of bread per day.
Break that down for me. And how many slices is that?
Well, that's in terms of pounds. That's let's say that's about 3 pounds of bread a day.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of bread.
Yeah, well, bread and cereals generally constituted about 60 to 80% of daily caloric intake, and the rest was was either vegetables, fruits, mostly dairy. Animal protein was a very rare commodity.
But also the bread was full of nutrients. Let's talk about that a little bit, right? Because this bread is a little different than the bread that we, are used to here in America.
Yeah, because the flours were generally whole grain. The only ones who got sifted flour, who got the lighter grades of flour, were the nobles and the wealthy, the aristocracy and their hangers-on. Right. For the rest, the peasants and the lower classes ate whole grains. They ate dark breads, and often, I mean, let's not gild the lily here. A lot of what they ate also included pebbles, sawdust, husks, and all sorts of other nasty stuff that was put into the flour, either intentionally or unintentionally. And in fact, millers have been were regarded with great contempt and great hatred, because they were the people who would take all of the farmers' hard-earned, hard-grown grain, skim the best for themselves, and leave the farmers and the peasants with the worst of the worst. But there were definitely social connotations to the kind of bread one ate. Dark bread was strictly considered a lower class bread. The lighter the bread, the higher its social status.
Interesting. Tell us, yeah. No, I was just going to say, we were talking about marble the other day, and you shared that really interesting theory that you have about marble, which I love.
Yeah, marble rye. Okay. Do you have that picture?
We do, actually. We're going to show it. Yeah, we can show it now, possibly. Yeah, we'll see if we can show it.
No, that's not. No.
We'll get it for you. This is our section we're going to return to a little later.
Right. Okay.
There we go.
No, that's not marble rye. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the thing about marble rye is when I was researching inside the Jewish bakery, I found an account, a memoir from a Jewish writer, to the effect that some of the more socially pretentious people in his village, the women, when they baked the bread, the dark bread, wanted to pretend that they were higher status. And so they would take a little bit of sifted flour and mix a lighter colored dough and cover the dark bread with it. And so to all intents and purposes, they were coming back when they walked back from the communal bakery with their loaves under their arms or in their arms. Everybody would see, oh, look at Mrs. Schwartz. She's got white bread, so she must they must be doing very well. And one of the things that I think supports my case is that in all of the years and all of the marble ryes I've eaten, never once have I seen a marble rye with the dark dough on the outside. It's always the lighter dough that's on the outside. So that's my theory.
Really
It'll never be proven, but that's where I think it comes from.
Well, now that we actually started with some of these photos, I think we should go back and
Okay.
review what we're calling the bread porn section of
Right.
the salon, because these pictures from your book are just so gorgeous. So yeah, let's roll some of those photos if we can. Yeah, we're going to go back to the beginning. So we've got, I think this first one is the Lithuanian rye. Is that right?
Right. Correct. Everyday Lithuanian rye. Correct.
And so tell us a little bit about this bread. This is just sort of an everyday.
Baltic ryes in general, I mean, I find them just absolutely fascinating from both a technical and a sensory perspective, because the techniques that are used, and I have a loaf right over here, the techniques that are used are incredibly sophisticated, and it just blew me away while I was writing The Rye Baker and doing the research. It just blew me away that you were these traditional bakers, without benefit of any of our modern science or technology, who came up with these unbelievably sophisticated ways of managing fermentation and managing the conversion of starches into sugars, and that's what these breads do. This particular bread is built on a sourdough, but it also starts on what's called a scald, where the rye flour is first mixed with boiling water. And what the boiling water does is it kills whatever microorganisms are in the flour and gelatinizes some of the starches. And then when it cools down a little bit, malt is added to this scald. And what malt does is it's got an enzyme that converts starches into sugars. Okay, and so you have this mix that is incredibly sugar rich, and throw some caraway into it. And when caraway hits boiling water, also it becomes very floral. It loses its that strong, sharp astringency, and becomes almost like anise, not quite as licorice-y. But, and so the Baltic bakers would do this. They'd have this scald, and then they'd mix it with a sourdough, and put these breads together, and then bake them at two temperatures. In Latvia, for instance, the breads are baked first after they've been formed into loaves and proofed. They're baked first for about a minute to 2 minutes at 800 degrees, and what that does is it sets the crust, and then they move it down to a 400-degree oven for another 40 or 45 minutes. And this particular bread would never pass muster in Latvia because it's got a broken crust. Okay.
Wow. Oh, let's see that. Oh, interesting.
The breads have to look like this.
Wow.
Okay? They have to be clear and clean and just,
Yeah.
And the in the Baltics generally, that is true. And the breads are very similar. In Estonia, the bread is called rukile, but it's also the same kind of thing. In Lithuanian, it's called rūžinė duona. And in Latvian, it's called ruzurukmaize. So, but three names, but essentially the same bread. Very sweet, sour.
Let's move on to. There's some questions about caraway, but yeah, let's move on to the Borodinsky. The Borodinsky.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yes, Borodinsky. Borodinsky. The GOST stands for the Russian Bureau of Standards.
Okay.
And it is basically what it is the Germans have the DIN, which is also an equivalent where national standards are registered. And this particular bread is the formula includes 20% wheat flour and 80% rye. And that is the formula that's registered with the GOST. I've also baked Borodinskys that are 100% rye. Story about Borodinsky, it's named after the Battle of Borodino, which anybody familiar with War and Peace knows is kind of the grand climax of the action, where Pierre serves under Marshal Kutuzov. And the story goes that Marshal Kutuzov fortified his troops on the eve of battle with this particular bread, which didn't help much because they lost. But in fact, this is a bread that first appeared in Moscow in the 1930s, and quickly became, it moved out into the provinces in the 40s and 50s, and quickly became the standard Russian bread. It's marvelous because it's also very sour, but it's also spiced with coriander, which has these really nice citrusy notes.
Nice.
And it's a wonderful bread. I bake it all the time for myself.
I'll come down to San Diego and get one from you.
Deal.
Okay.
But just let me know when.
Okay. So then we've got the Latvian slice.
Right.
We might run through these a little bit. We don't have time for everything.
Yeah.
Let's go.
One looks like,
oh, go ahead.
That one looks like what's called in Latvian salskava maisa, which is a lighter bread, and it's sweet and sour. Okay, this is very interesting.
This is so interesting. I love this story.
Right. Again, when I was researching inside the Jewish bakery, another one of the accounts about village life in Lithuania, where the memoirist was from, talked about how in the autumn and winter the women would bake their breads on maple leaves, and I was fascinated by the idea. And then when I got to Latvia, first time I got there in 2018, this was at a farmer's market in Riga, and I was talking to one of the bakers, and he picked it up and he showed me, and lo and behold, there were the maple leaves. And then the next trip, 2019, we visited a small family bakery in northeastern Latvia, and the group that I was with, we all baked our loaves of bread, and the baker had a whole big basket of fresh maple leaves for us to bake our breads on. So it was a great experience.
Amazing. Well, actually, now let's move to talking about the tours a little bit. We do have some fun clips. Well, tell us a little bit about the tours, and then we'll roll a couple clips after.
Okay, quick story about the tours. I was flying back east. I guess it was I guess must be about 3 years ago now. And I was talking to my seatmate, who said, told him what I was doing and the kinds of stuff I was involved in. He said, "Well, have you ever led any tours?" And I said, "No, but it sounds like a great idea." So I immediately went to work and decided to put together a tour of bakeries, primarily, but also cultural sites in Finland and Latvia, both of which have very, very strong and continuing rye traditions. Because what's interesting is rye is being rapidly supplanted in its traditional area by wheat. So in Germany, for example, rye breads are still popular, but not nearly as widely consumed as they were.
That's interesting.
Say 50 years ago. And this is true even in Finland, in Sweden.
Why?
Poland.
Why is this?
Well, first of all, because wheat is much more available now. In the 50s, the UN introduced a wide variety of hardy wheat strains that could grow in difficult conditions. So,
excuse me.
So in areas where traditionally the agriculture could only support rye because of climate, because of soil conditions, and so forth, it was now possible to plant wheat. And frankly, wheat is much easier to work with than rye. Rye is a very
rye is it's an unruly weed, right?
The unruly weed, and it's a very unruly dough. It's very sticky. It's really quirky.
Yeah.
It can be unstable. Wheat is, frankly, wheat's a no-brainer.
Right. Wheat's easy.
It's very easy. And so, it's easier. And as a result, it was easier and it was cheaper and it was more available to work with. And it was less aggravation for the bakers. And it was lighter in color. Okay. Because those old social prejudices
Yeah.
die very hard.
It's really
You know,
fascinating.
there's a
Yeah.
saying. There's a saying in Brittany, in France, when to describe somebody who's come out of a period of hardship as finir de manger son pain noir. One has, has finished eating his black bread. So
yeah, well, I want to come back to that in a minute, but I want to show, you sent us a couple of really fun clips
the
from the
videos.
tours. So
Right. These are bakers shaping the loaves, and they shoot two different techniques.
yeah, okay, great. We're going to roll those clips.
Okay. The first one was taken in Latvia, in a town called Ranka, at a bakery called Chilmani, that makes, in my opinion, some of the best rye bread in Latvia, which makes superb rye breads. And each of those loaves weighs about 4 pounds.
Oh
So
my gosh.
yeah, and all of the work is handwork, and it's quite amazing. The second one was taken in a bakery, Halma Bakery in Espoo. Espoo is the way it's pronounced, which is outside of Helsinki, and that was at 6 o'clock in the morning. We got up really early, and drove up to Espoo, and to watch them make the rye breads. And so these mostly young men and young women who were working with both hands, tucking in a loaf of a lump of dough, and then creating it. And they would do that for hours on end, and then move the stuff off to proof, and then into the ovens and so forth. So
it's a lot of work. I mean, we were talking about that the other day. So much work.
A lot of work. Yes.
So how many hours generally goes into the making of a loaf of rye? I mean, it's different because there's so many different kinds, but just how many?
Yeah, it really varies. I would say minimum for a basic rye bread, probably 14 to 16.
Wow.
Okay, because you're starting with a sourdough sponge, which should ferment for probably 10 to 12 hours, and then the final dough will bulk ferment for another hour or two, and then proof for another hour or so, and then bake for probably an hour. So we're talking, 12, 13, 14 hours. Yeah, but most of it is waiting.
Right. It's the waiting. It's the waiting. Right.
Yeah, it's just waiting. The actual work involved is maybe 40 minutes.
That's right. That's right. Well, we're almost at our time. I just wanted to ask you before we go, what do you make of sort of the pandemic bread bump that, has been happening where everyone's making sourdough? And I mean, to me, I feel like there's such a connection here, that bread is sustaining, and it comforts us. It was the comfort food during, times of war, and also I think recently during the pandemic. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I'll share a story that's somewhat embarrassing, but I don't care. Years and years and years ago, when I was in grad school at University of Wisconsin, I was living in a hippie commune, and one of my jobs there was baking the bread. And one day, I came down to bake the bread, and about 3 hours before, I'd taken some LSD. Okay, and so I was tripped out of my skull baking this bread. And what was really cool about it was, here I am with this huge pile of dough, because we had probably 25 or 30 people living there, and so it was enormous, and we baked for a week. So it was an enormous amount of bread. I'm up to my elbows in this dough and watching the stuff ferment. And I sort of connected with bakers 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, that there is something so fundamental, so elemental about the act of baking bread beyond, feeding people you care about, but also it's something that connects us across generations and connects us to our own roots and our own history, in a way that just transcends cultures and it transcends individuals. And it's really a cosmic experience. I think, again,
I love that.
Karina spoke about that in a similar kind of metaphoric way about the poem, "The Loaf of Bread is a Poem," or poem,
Yes.
poetry is the loaf of bread. So yeah, so it was very, very primal. So.
Well, we have to leave it there. We hope to do, something with you again in the future. There's so much going on.
I'd love to.
Get the book. The first book is out of print, but hopefully it's going to be back. You're working on it. We know that.
Yeah, let me just say this: I'm fighting with my publisher now to get the rights back, and I expect, hoping that it will be back in print in a reasonable amount of time.
Sounds good. All right, Stan, we'll see you soon. We'll talk to you soon. We'll see you toward the end of the program. Okay.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, you too. And now we're so lucky that we get to have Karina back with us to read a second poem called September Tomatoes, which is one of our absolute favorites. So I'm going to go away and let you do your thing.
Thank you, Lisa. September Tomatoes. The whiskey stink of rot has settled in the garden, and a burst of fruit flies rises when I touch the dying tomato plants. Still, the claws of tiny yellow blossoms flail in the air as I pull the vines up by the roots and toss them in the compost. It feels cruel. Something in me isn't ready to let go of summer so easily, to destroy what I've carefully cultivated all these months. Those pale flowers might still have time to fruit. My great-grandmother sang with the girls of her village as they pulled the flax, songs so old and so tied to the season that the very sound seemed to turn the weather.
Thank you so much for that. It's so incredible to hear the poet read the poem that you've read many, many, many times. And we were talking about before we came on the broadcast this morning today, that this poem is part of our curriculum, part of our reading materials for our Helix Travel Fellowship. So, your poem has been read for many, many years, and it's a beloved part of our curriculum, I guess you'd say. So thank you so much for being here and for reading it. And before we say goodbye, do you want to tell us a little bit about the inspiration for this poem?
Sure. So, it goes back to what Stan was talking about, this sort of cosmic connection that we all have if we care to find it, with the past, with our ancestors, with traditions, human traditions that span the globe. And I felt around the time that I wrote this poem that there was a disconnect going on, and with global warming as well, I felt, oh my goodness, gardening is very different these days. I don't even know when to pull the tomatoes up because they're still ripening. Maybe in a few weeks I'll be able to have some more cherry tomatoes. So it's just this feeling of disconnection from the seasons, from the earth patterns, from the rhythms, the natural rhythms that people used to feel so much closer to, and as well with our traditions that have been handed down and that we've shared with each other. So this feeling of pulling vines up by the roots, the image that's used in the poem is definitely a feeling that I had when I was writing this poem.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I mean, although seasonally it takes place in the fall and we're here in spring, but it's all, I just found that the themes of it were so resonant for any kind of harvest time that we wanted to include it today. So we love this poem and we're so appreciative that you're with us today.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. So we'll see you towards the end as well. Okay. Thank you, Karina. All right. So for our last segment, we're thrilled to have Sierhe Dahusho. I hope I'm saying it right. Oh, I practiced. But I'm sure it was wrong. Who's with us from Minsk, and Nadzea Norton, who is with us from Santa Cruz. So good to see you both. Sierhe, we met in 2019. I danced with you in a field with some people, and it was great fun. And we're so excited to have you with us today. Sierhe is a Belarusian singer, musician, and ethnographer who actively and relentlessly promotes Belarusian ethnic songs, organizes ethnographic expeditions, and collects Belarusian folklore. He plays guitar, woodwind instruments, and the hurdy-gurdy. And I mean, he plays so many instruments. We won't get to them all today, but we'll get a little taste. And Nadzea works with Sierhe to create a wide array of projects, including their initiative Tradicja. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm.
Practiced. With the goal of developing and promoting Belarusian traditional culture in all forms. So Nadzea is with us to help translate today. So welcome to you both.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks
Hi.
for having
Hi,
us.
Lisa.
Hi. So I would love to just, you played for us at the top of the program, and I'd love for you to just say a little bit about the piece that you played and the instrument that you were using at the top.
Розкажи, коли ласка, крышечку про песню, яку ти співав на початку.
Гэта была не песня, гэта быў найгрыш на такім унікальным інструменце, называецца акарина. Драўляны інструмент.
It rather was a piece of the song. So, and he used this instrument, which the name of it is ocarina, and I think it doesn't go. That's how it sounds in English too.
Wood ocarina.
It's a wooden one.
Okay,
Так, это были мелодии на тему песен літа.
So, and it was about summertime. So. About harvest time.
Harvest time, yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you for that selection. We've been exploring these ideas about sustenance and comfort, and around this time of year. And can you tell us anything about related cultural traditions in Belarus during this time?
Расскажи, калі ласка, крышечку про ураджай, вось про традыцыю ураджая менавіта ў Беларусі.
Harvest tradition. У нас гэта вельмі важны этап напрыканцы лета.
It's in a Belarusian tradition, calendar tradition, it's a very important stage at the end of summer, which is in our case, it's end of August.
Ураджаю надаваліся важныя функцыі. Па-першае, гэта тое, што карміла потым цэлы год, а па-другое, нават мела такія сакральныя функцыі. І нават все абряды звязаныя са зборам ураджая і завяршэннем збора ураджая.
So it's very important because basically harvest, so that means that what people are, so what they're going to gather, they're going to eat all year after that.
Right.
So, and that's why it was so important. And it's even had a sacred meaning as well.
Yes.
Так, гэта адбывалася напрыканцы лета ў жніўні, і таму называўся абряд жніво.
So, and this celebration of harvest was taking place at the end of August, which in Belarusian sounds like a жнивень. So that's why the name of the tradition is жниво. So жнивень, жниво.
Жниво.
That's
Жніво,
right.
Practicing. I'm practicing.
І гэта быў вельмі важны дзень, калі шлі працаваць в поле, праналі белыя кашулі. Вось менавіта все чыста, все белае.
So, and the beginning of this celebration, this holiday, so in the early morning, everybody that was very important to wear all white. So clean and white clothing. And then they went to the field to work. So that's where they started. So like a first harvest day in clean and white.
Wow. And then do they at the end of the day, or they're not clean and white anymore? They've been in the fields all day.
И они, то есть они заставались в этом одении до конца, ну, до конца дня. Yes, they didn't change.
І працавалі все, хто жылі. Там менавіта жанчыны выконвалі жалі на жыта, так, а мужчыны больш такую цяжкую працу выконвалі. Там снапы вязалі, все адбівалі і все такое.
So, and the whole village, so it doesn't matter the age, so everybody were taking participation. So, and women were doing their job, so with the wheat and everything, and for men was more harder work.
Right,
so,
right.
But all together.
Amazing.
І для нашай традыцыі, спеўнай традыцыі, менавіта жніво характарызуе жаночы спеў. Жаночыя спевы і вельмі такі паглыблены філасофскі. Вось жніўныя песні адні з самых такіх глыбокіх сакральных песен.
And one of the characteristic feature in Belarus during this harvest, so that women were singing. So it's a work with the women singing songs.
That's right.
Mostly, and the songs in particular, they have a very deep philosophical meaning. So compared to others, so it's pretty deep.
Amazing. Yeah.
І праз гэтыя песні жанчыны, можна сказаць, пражывалі все свае пакуты, все болі, які былі вось цягам года, да. То есть такі прожить, пережить праз песню, праз вось цяжкі труд.
So, and while they were singing, so women kind of were relieving the all suffering, the all kind of bad parts and the good parts of their life before that. So it's relieving, kind of revisiting, so rethinking. That's why it's philosophical. That's why we said it was a philosophical meaning as well, and healing, I would say too.
І гэтыя песні спявалі толькі жанчыны в традыцыі.
So, and one more time, it's important to mention only women were singing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, of course, I want to know, we could do a whole other salon on that. So I'm fascinated by that. So that's we'll discuss that at a later date, because that sounds really interesting. Just because we don't have tons of time, is there anything you want to tell us about the work you're doing now? I know you're very active politically, and I know Tradicija is doing a lot of things, and you have a new band as well. So please tell us what you're up to.
Розкажи, калі ласка, про те, що ти робиш зараз, які проекти ти виконуєш, ми виконуємо.
Мы супольна вот с Надей запустили черговый проект под назвой «Кола белорусских обрядов», карагод Circle of Belarusian Ritual Rites.
So, just a few months ago, we're together started a new project, the Circle of Belarusian Rites, so which includes 4 seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. So now we're having a crowdfunding for the spring, and
і зараз вельмі актыўны праект у нас адбываецца в онлайне, і гэта традыцыйны строй, это віртуальная энцыклапедыя народных строяў, гэта праграмы для дзяцей, гэта кола беларускіх абрядаў і музычныя праекты, музычныя выданні, канцэрты.
So mostly now we're working online as everybody else.
Right.
So, and there's another project is going on. So it's about the traditional costume, Belarusian costume. We also have a program for kids and the musical projects as well.
Oh, fantastic. And so we can find all this information on the Facebook sites, is that correct?
Facebook, yes, I would say Tradicija,
Yeah.
Facebook, and YouTube. So
Okay, great. We'll link out to those for you both.
Okay,
So what we'd love to do now is if you could sort of tee us up. I know you're going to play 2 more pieces, and if you could sort of introduce those, and then we'll let you play, and then we're all going to just sort of come back and as a group. So if you want to set those up, that would be great.
Скажи некалькі словаў пра песні, якія ты зараз будзеш спяваць, а потым заспяваеш і будзем скончваць.
Конечно, я хотел бы больше песен проспевать и распавесці, але
Yeah,
сегодня
I'd
мы
like to
спынимся.
sing more songs, so but maybe next time.
I know. I think we need to do a full concert. We need to
Next
talk.
time,
We'll
next time.
talk. Yeah.
Але у нас так само тут поздній вечір. І я заспіваю першу, як приклад, пісню «Літо». «Літо» пісня з Полесья.
So in the first song it would be Lito. So this song is from Polessia. That's one of the region in Belarus.
Так, і я зіграю на традиційному інструменті колова ліра. Мені подається, вельми відповідає настрой цього інструменту.
So and he's gonna play the hurdy-gurdy. So kolova lira. So it's a traditional Belarusian instrument.
І другую песню я хочу ось менавіта да теми ось нашай сустрэчы таксама. Гэта песня на ідышы, знойдзеная на тэрыторыі Беларусі. В Пінску запісаў вядомы папулярызатар клезмерскай музыкі і музыкант Зісел Сліповіч, які жыве зараз у Нью-Йорку.
And the second song, so it's going to be in Yiddish, which was found by a pretty famous musician, Zisel Slipovich, originally from Belarus, but now he lives in New York. So this song is going to be in Yiddish.
І, мабыць, эта песня впершыню прагучыць пад коловую ліру, таму што она так ніколі не гучала.
So, and publicly, so that's kind of a surprise. So publicly, Sergei is gonna sing this song with hurdy-gurdy for the first time. So
Fantastic.
It's my experiment.
yeah.
Oh, yay. Excellent. That's what this is for. Okay, great. Let's get to it. Excellent.
Літо, літичко, ой, літо, літичко. Поспіло житичко, поспіло житичко. Ой, літо, літо новина, ой, літо, літо новина. Поспіло жито ярина, поспіло жито ярина. Ой, літо, літо, літичко, ой, літо, літо, літичко, поспіло жито, житичко, поспіло жито, житичко. And second song, Gabe. Gabe, você will del Rebe will, mi soll in der Langen, was Gladkes mit Schmalz, als der Rebbe mit der Rebbitzen soll sein, der gesunden Hals. Lekko wie die Jonte, bim bam bam bam, lekko wie Schabes, bim bam bam bam. Lekko wie die Jonte, bim bam bam bam, lekko wie Schabes, bim bam. Gabei, was will der Rebbe will, mir soll in der Langen, wois, hat mit Joich, als der Rebbe mit der Rebbitzen soll sein, der gesunden Boich. Lekko wie der Jonte, bim bam bam bam, lekko wie Schabes, bim bam bam bam. Lekko wie der Jonte, bim bam bam bam, lekko wie Schabes, bim bam. Gabei, was will der Rebbe will, mir soll in der Langen, was hat mit Fisch, als der Rebbe mit der Rebbitzen soll sein, der gesunde Fisch. Lekko wie die Jonte, bim bam bam bam, lekko wie Schabes, bim bam bam bam. Lekko wie die Jonte, bim bam bam bam, lekko wie Schabes, bim bam. Let's together. Lekko wie die Jonte, bim bam bam bam, lekko wie Schabes, bim bam bam bam. Lekko wie die Jonte, bim bam bam bam, lekko wie Schabes, bim bam.
That was so incredible. That was fantastic. Thank you so, so much. So that was the first time.
Thank you very much.
We can say this was the first time.
Yes, we can say.
Oh my
yes.
gosh, I'm so honored. Fantastic. Well, we're almost at time, so let's bring everybody back on to just say a quick hello and thank you. And yeah, if everybody can give a wave, we'll see you soon. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
us.
Have a
everybody.
great day and
It was
night
a
wherever
pleasure.
you are. Let's shout out where you're from. Stan, from San Diego. Stan's from San
right,
Diego.
right.
From Pioneer Valley. What city? What town?
Belchertown, right
Belchertown?
next to Amherst.
Nice. And Nadzea is in
Santa Cruz, California.
and Sierra.
Minsk, Belarus.
Bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
До
Have a good day.
побачення.
Thank
До
you.
побачення.